One Bills Live. Thanks for joining us. And also joining us here for the second hour of the show, senior producer from NFL Films, Greg Cosell, also co-host of ESPN's NFL Matchup Show, to kind of go over the progress made by some of the players on the roster of late. And Greg, as always, thanks for giving us some time. I would say that it was interesting to note that in a horrible preseason outcome, all three of Buffalo's drafted defensive linemen flashed. You noticed them in this game, even though the defense as a whole probably didn't play all that well. But T.J. Sanders flashed again on the pass rush. So too did Deone Walker. And Landon Jackson coming off the edge had a couple of plays where you're like, oh, there he is. I'm just kind of curious for your thoughts on that, knowing that, with Ogunjobi and Hoecht going on reserve suspended when we get down to 53, these guys are going to have to play.
Yeah, I watched, I think Jackson played 37 snaps, and the other two, Sanders and Walker, each played over 30, so they got a lot of work in. We spoke about this last week, and, I'm just really curious to see it develop, but Walker, again, just showed that tendency to play too upright off the snap, and the thing is, he's so gifted in terms of athletic traits for a man that size that if he can just consistently play a little lower, I think there's so much there to work with. Again, I'm not a coach. I'm not a defensive line coach, so I'm not going to speak as if I know the answer to that question. Steve, you may have a better way to respond to that than I, but the one thing we do know is that if you do play upright, it doesn't matter how strong or how gifted you are in this league, you're going to have a tough time. But you're right. He did have some positive plays, but, that's the only thing about him that would concern me.
Yeah, and I would agree. He's so tall, and he's got some long legs. He is really athletic, is Deone Walker.
Yeah.
But if you bend your knees and get a little more leverage, your size and weight just makes it that exponentially more difficult to stop you. Yeah, when he gets it going, and I like the way he rushes too. He doesn't rush like a big heavy. He's rushing with a little bit of hand movement and trying to slap guys off and trying to get slippery and some wiggle, which is a little different than most big guys.
No, it's funny you say that too, because I watched him. Obviously, I watched him this past summer with his tape from 2024, but I watched him last summer with his 2023 tape, and I came away watching that thinking that if this guy had a really good final year at Kentucky, that this guy could be a top 20 pick in the draft. And obviously, the year wasn't quite as good, and some of the warts in his game showed up, which is why he ended up being drafted in the 4th round. But there's a lot there. I'm just really curious to see if it can come together. On the other hand, Sanders, I think he again showed really well. And Brownie, I know you remember because you remember all this stuff, but we talked about him leading up to the draft and even when they drafted him. And I really liked his tape a lot coming out of South Carolina. And the thing I always like to see, and I think it's always a positive sign, and I'm not going to sit here and say this means he'll be a great player. None of us know the answer to that question, but he looks similar to the way he played in college. And I always think that's a good sign for a young player, that the traits that they showed in college, they could come into the league and they still can show those traits. Because he's got really good quickness off the ball. I thought he showed a little bull rush power. He showed a one-arm stab as a pass rusher because I think his game coming out of South Carolina was built more on quickness than pure power, but he's going to need some power. So that was a positive sign watching the tape.
Yeah, and then with Jackson, even Coach McDermott today said that he felt that Landon improved from game 1 to game 2, and I think if you watched him in game 1, it almost appeared like he had too many thoughts running through his head. He was so wrapped up in what his assignment was. I think it compromised him just playing free. And I think we saw a little more of that freedom in his game against the Bears.
And I think he's moving in that direction. I still think he's thinking about it a little too much because he knows how to use his long arms, and you're not seeing that quite as much. You saw it on a couple of snaps, but I remember in college he showed that constantly. In fact, he had dominant snaps against Will Campbell when they played LSU, and in fact beat Campbell a number of times, and he used his arm length. my sense is he's still thinking a little bit through the process of how to rush the quarterback. And I think that's normal because now you're playing at a higher level. You probably in your mind think, well, it's not quite going to be as easy as it was. Not that it was easy in college, but it's going to be harder. But I think there's a lot there to him. The one thing that always shows up, guys, and this, is the guy plays hard. And I think that's a great starting point because a lot of defense very often is not, looking pretty. It's just playing with tenacity, competitiveness. And, there are more sacks made in the NFL, sort of second reaction sacks, than when you just beat a guy right away. That doesn't happen as often in the NFL as people might think.
So the Bills are also still, and even Sean McDermott referred to it today in his press conference, that they're still looking for the guy to start next to Taylor Rapp at safety.
Yeah.
This last game against Chicago, Jordan Hancock got some reps in there, and unfortunately it ended a little early because he got his shoulder dinged and he left. But Hancock is a guy that Brownie and I have been watching. He seems athlete enough to be back there, and they had a timetable, and we've talked about it a lot, where corner, nickel, safety, that a timetable when they were going to sort through all of that. His versatility is why he got drafted. What did you see in his short time on the field the other night?
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, for 2 games, I think what we've seen is just how aggressive he is. He's got a quick trigger playing downhill. He's very aggressive. He played on the back end as well. He did that at Ohio State. I know he got hurt. I don't know the nature of the injury, so I don't know if that means, again, he could sit out the last game. That doesn't mean he's not ready week 1 or again, he's a later round pick, so we don't even know what they think of him. Or I certainly don't know that. You guys would know better. But I liked him coming out, and I thought that he could play in the league. It's funny. There was another safety at Ohio State the year before named Ronnie Hickman, who's now going to start for the Browns this year. And in some ways, I thought they were similar kind of prospects. I think Hancock can play in the league, and it would not surprise me if he ends up as a starting player somewhere down the line. We still don't have a good read on Cole Bishop. He only played 11, 12 snaps. I think he played all the snaps that Caleb Williams played. You can't really get on him for being beat on the touchdown because that was a great play call with a switch release, and he was matched on a wide receiver, and he was out leveraged. It's hard to say that, oh boy, that means he can't play. And there was even one other snap where the ball wasn't thrown, or he was matched up on a Dunze when he was number 3 to trips. But for the most part, he was playing on the back end, and you didn't see a lot of action. So it's hard to get a read in the games. Again, I'm not in practice, but it's hard to get a read in the game as to what Cole Bishop, is at this point.
Yeah, and the problem is he had just come back from a quad injury, so he was on a pitch count in that game. They wanted to hold him to 12 snaps, and that's exactly what he played in the game on the defensive side of the ball. I just think, we're 2.5 weeks from the opener, and they still don't have a defined answer as to who the other safety is going to be, and you can tell it's causing some angst among the defensive staff. Another pass rusher.
As it should. I mean, particularly with who they open with.
The other guy that has been all over the field the first 2 preseason games has been Michael Hoecht. And I think the reason he got so many snaps last Sunday was because they know he's not playing in the first 6 games. So it's almost like, let's get him into as much game shape as we can now while he can play. But he has been a menace the first 2 games.
What's interesting to me, though, and, is he's essentially playing defensive end. And, look, we know that the Bills play essentially a 4-man D-line. Where he came from with the Rams, he was used in a much more versatile way. Again, we don't know what's going to happen when the season starts, and obviously he's not going to play the first 6 games, so we don't know what happens when he comes back. But, one of the reasons I thought he was such a good player with the Rams was that versatility and the position flexibility. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what their plan is for him because he can't play in the first 6 games. They're probably not worried about moving him all around in the preseason. They just want to get him snaps, as you said, Brownie. But I'm really curious. It's not that he can't rush the quarterback. I mean, he did have a great pass rush. That was against the tight end. So, sometimes when I see an edge rusher beat a tight end, that doesn't necessarily mean he's a great pass rusher. But Hoecht can rush the quarterback, but he can do a lot of different things. So we'll see what happens when he comes back. I mean, that's a ways down the road. That seems like, 5 years from now when we're talking when they play game 7,
Right. So we were talking just before we came on the air about, this it's hard to watch late in these games, these preseason games. So, was there anything about this Bills-Bears game? I mean, we had a therapy session here yesterday on our show trying to get through the aftermath of that game. What jumped out? Was there any positives, if any, about that game? I mean, it was really tough to watch.
No, look, the games. I don't mean to not take these games seriously because I've been to training camps in my career. Steve, you've been through all this, and you know how important they are for players. Players trying to make the team. So I don't want to disparage these games, but it's for me because I've become so focused a lot more on tactics and schematics, in regular season games. They're harder games just for me to watch because, I'm not necessarily learning a lot about the schematics and the tactics. So, obviously I made it a point to watch Caleb Williams closely because I know I'm going to be asked about him by everybody. So, obviously I wanted to watch him closely. But as far as the Bills, I don't think you can look at the score and have it mean anything. I really don't. Look, last year in the first preseason game, they lost to the Bears. I think they gave up over 30 points in that game, if memory serves me correctly. And, do the scores matter in these games? Sure. Do the coaches want the players who are playing to execute and compete at a high level? Of course they do. And they matter to those players because I don't know. Yeah, I don't have the Bills roster right in front of me. You guys would know better, Brownie. How many roster spots do you think are truly going to be up for grabs? Every team's different, but how many would you say are truly up for grabs?
7 or 8?
Yeah. So, I mean,
it's a pretty locked in roster. The Bills
obviously are. Yeah, they're a really good team, and so those 7 or 8 matter to the players. I believe me, like I said, I'm not disparaging that at all. But a lot of teams don't have a lot of roster spots that are up for grabs.
Yeah, they matter to the players. They just don't matter to the team, I guess, is the best way to put it, right? See if there's a difference. But
what do you make of this push by Tyrell Shavers? He's shown up in both preseason games. He's trying to get one of those last receiver spots, and I think the thing that's kind of standing in the way here is they're having a tough time finding a defined role for him on special teams because, as you know, if you're the 5th or 6th receiver, you better help on special teams if you want a jersey on game day. And I think they're having a tough time finding where he fits in that phase of the game. But maybe just speak to what you've seen from him receiver-wise.
Well, one of the things, you're dealing with a guy that's long, athletic, and can run. And, he lined up outside. We're looking at the play where he caught the back shoulder fade. I know he only had 2 catches, but that's a back shoulder fade. He can line up outside. I think Josh Allen likes those kinds of throws. He likes to feel that his receivers can make these kinds of plays. I think that's one reason they drafted Keon Coleman. Again, we'll see how the receiver position shakes out. My guess is they probably got, 1, 2, and 3 probably, I would assume pretty much set. Wouldn't you say 1, 2, and 3 would be Coleman, Shakir, and Palmer?
Yes.
So, then you're dealing with who's 4 and 5. 4 could get, this is from 2 weeks ago, and you can see, this guy can run a little bit. And he's got some stride length. He can line up on the outside. I agree with you. He'd probably have to play special teams. And special teams with the new rule, with the kickoff rule, is that's becoming more important than it has been in previous years. So there probably needs to be a place for him there. But you're dealing with a guy, and again, I'm not going to sit here and say if he played a lot, he'd catch 50 balls for 800 yards. None of us know the answer to that. But those long, athletic guys that can run, there's not 100 of those guys.
Right, and this is a team that we noticed last year. The one thing that. Well, on the defensive side anyway, and a little bit on the offense, you need a guy that can really take the lid off once in a while and who can stretch it out. You got this quarterback with the arm, and sometimes you never really feel like they air it out enough for the long. I think that's one of the things that was missing from their game last year was the long ball. They hit it once in a 2, but most of their big plays were short throw, long run, and James Cook. So he may give them something they've been looking for.
Yeah, no, it's funny you say that because I just spent, the last couple of days, I've been watching all kinds of NFL stuff going back to last year as well as some of the preseason stuff. And I watched all of Jared Goff's 15-plus yard completions. And you see the impact that Jamison Williams has. Now, Shavers obviously is not Jamison Williams. I'm not trying to make a direct comparison, obviously. I'm just responding to you, Steve, that if you have a guy that is a vertical dimension, that changes everything in the way you can design your passing game.
Just looking around the league, we got some quarterback decisions that were made, Greg. Joe Flacco in Cleveland, and then today Daniel Jones in Indianapolis. We've seen Flacco in that system. I mean, he came in and led him to the playoffs a couple of years ago. What do you think that Daniel Jones can do for the Colts offense with Shane Steichen?
Well, I think you guys know this. You've been around, Steve. You certainly know it, having played. Brown, you've been around long enough to know this. I think that coaches, no matter what side of the ball you're on, they want to trust their players. And I think that while Daniel Jones no one's going to sit here and say, gee, this guy's a top 5 quarterback in the league. I'm sure the feeling is, and this is my sense of it, maybe I'm wrong, but my sense of it is that they believe that they can line up Daniel Jones and Steichen can call his game and he's going to execute the game plan. Now, maybe it's not going to be special. Maybe it's not going to look unbelievable, but I think that you have a trust factor, whereas with Anthony Richardson, you have no idea what you're going to get. Can he make special plays? Absolutely. But you just don't know. And I think for a coach, I think there's nothing worse than going into a game feeling you just don't know if the 80 hours or the 100 hours or whatever number of hours these coaches spend during the week game planning and putting things together is going to be executed. They understand there are plays the defense will win just because they win tactically or a guy makes a play. But they want to feel that their quarterback is going to go out there and execute the plan, play after play after play. And right now, Anthony Richardson has just not shown the ability to do that. And I think they just feel that Daniel Jones, even though there's nothing quote-unquote special about him, that he can do that better.
You got a guy like Anthony Richardson, and we talked about this. I think you can see a trend in the NFL where Anthony Richardson came in with, 11 or 13 starts as a college quarterback, and you've got other quarterbacks coming out with 30-plus starts.
Yeah,
Daniels and Nix had 60.
Right, so you've got it's just a better evaluation process, and I think there's going to be fewer and fewer teams rolling the dice on a unicorn of an athlete that they don't know about for a guy who they do know about with a ton of film, and they know exactly what they're getting, or at least a little more accurately what they're getting.
Well, I think now, because there's more quarterbacks that have athletic ability, I think you get caught up in what's the balance between quote-unquote playmakers at the quarterback position, because they can make special plays, versus the ability to line up and make throws from the pocket. Now, both are factors, and you can't say, you have to decide what you think is ultimately more important. I think most coaches would say that the ability to throw it from the pocket over the course of a season is more important. But you get so enamored with the guys that can make those special plays, it gets hard. But, Anthony Richardson has not shown the ability to be consistent throwing the ball from the pocket.
But it's not even, making a philosophical decision. It's like, well, you've got this guy or that guy. It's how much can this guy function in the offense and how special is this guy? And you compare the two quarterbacks. Forget the philosophy of having an athletic quarterback. It's who can you win with? And you think a guy, these guys in Cleveland, they owe it to the 52 guys on the roster and the coaching staff to give those guys the best chance to win. So in Indianapolis, they're looking at Daniel Jones and thinking, well, he's not special, but at least the other guys get a chance to help.
I mean, I think the way coaches feel is that if we put in a good game plan, and of course coaches feel they're going to, if we put in a good game plan, that our quarterback's going to execute it. And if they don't feel good about the quarterback's ability to execute it snap after snap after snap, then they don't feel they can trust him. That's the bottom line. I mean, I've heard coaches talk like that all the time. We've got to be able to trust the guy.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's what makes coaches breathe a little easier on game day for sure. And Shane Steichen's in year 3, and he's got to make it happen.
Yep.
So there it is. Greg, thanks as always for the time. We appreciate it. The next time we talk to you, we'll have a 53-man roster.
We'll know for sure. We'll know those 7 or 8 spots we think that are
That's
up for
right.
grabs. That'll be good.
All right. We'll talk to you then, Greg. Thanks as always.